So, welcome back. Look, it's been no secret that over the last couple of years I've made it quite clear that the No Retreat, No Surrender movies are probably some of my favourite martial arts films. Now, a lot of people would classify the No Retreat, No Surrender films, I don't know, I guess so bad that it's good. What is it that you want when you watch a kung fu or a martial arts film? You want good choreography, you want good fight scenes. Especially with the first two movies being directed by Yun Kwai, one of my all-time favourite Hong Kong movie directors. If you like martial arts films, then you probably like cheesy films. If you like cheesy films, then you're going to love No Retreat, No Surrender. What we are going to talk about in these next 3 episodes is something that people tend to forget about. Movie soundtracks. Now, we're going to talk about the music that was featured in 3 No Retreat, No Surrender movies. Now, I've always found soundtracks and movie scores to be a very important element to films, especially martial arts films. Now, you can have a mediocre sort of fight scene, but you can enhance that if you've got a great movie soundtrack or score. And just think about training montages. Now, you can have the most boring training montage, you put some zippy sort of 1980s synth music on it, and bang, you've got something a bit more interesting. Right, so over the next 3 episodes, we're going to be talking about the music to No Retreat, No Surrender. Alright, we've got our DVDs here. So I can jog my memory a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to watch No Retreat, No Surrender while we speak about the soundtracks. Alright, here we go. Now, at the start of this film, it always kind of really revved me up. And again, it's something to do with the soundtrack here. Listen to that. Real 1985 sort of vibe. 1985 Kung Fu martial arts vibe. Love it. Yeah. So, what was it? About 1985 this came out, I think, because Karate Kid came out 84, so a lot of people kind of compared this as the low budget sort of version of Karate Kid. Now, even though we know how much more effective all the choreography and everything was in this film, again, because Yun. Okay, so like Seasonal Film Corporation, like you saw that logo just before. So that was an independent film company from Hong Kong. So Yun, back in 1974, I think, he was the main dude, or he was one of the guys from the Shaw Brothers movies, the old kung fu films from Hong Kong. So I'm pretty sure Yun, he was a movie director. Before he was like a producer, or like, now you might remember seasonal films was really important for guys like Jackie Chan, Wong Jung Lee, Yuen Woo-ping, Conan Lee, Yun, Hiroyuki Sanada. Now Yuen Woo-ping, where he comes into the seasonal film sort of thing, if you remember Drunken Master with Jackie Chan, seasonal films, it's a seasonal films production. And that, you know how big that was for Jackie Chan back in his early days. What else? The other film that he was in, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, which was a really good film as well. I never had a good copy of that with the subtitles. I always had that rubbish sort of American dub. So look, what Yun wanted to do was he wanted to kind of expand the company. And I think there was a story about Yun when he'd just gotten out of the cinema watching Karate Kid, and I think he was quoted as saying something like, you know, this was a good film, it would have been really good if the fight scenes were good. Now look, no mistake about it, Karate Kid was a fantastic movie, but when it came to the fight scenes, they weren't really up to scratch, and they weren't anywhere near what the guys in Hong Kong were doing. So look, the story goes that Yun wanted to make his own sort of version of Karate Kid and just beef it up, you know, beef up the martial arts. Now, I'm not sure how true that story is, because look, this film was being made in 1984, which is when Karate Kid came out, so I don't know how true that is. So Seasonal Films and New World Pictures, they get together and they want to make a bunch of these American films, American martial arts films, but with the guys from Hong Kong. So with this Hong Kong element, which was an interesting sort of combination. So you got your Hong Kong choreography, your Hong Kong stunts and directors and things like that, with an American cast. Now on paper that kind of works, and look, it did kind of work, but it wasn't without a factor of cheese.
Karate is not to be used aggressively, but if I have no other choice,
Now sometimes the two worlds didn't blend together so well. So that's quite evident with some of the dialogue that you get in these films, some of the real cheesy lines, some of the bad acting, some of the good actors sounding bad as well, which is kind of interesting.
Please give her our love.
How did you know that my...
I'd hate to see anything happen to her.
See, listen!
We don't want any violence, Ian.
Now another thing that you've got to keep in mind is this is 1985, so 1985, back in Hong Kong, they weren't filming their action movies with sound, to my understanding. A lot of movies, especially the Jackie Chan films and the Sammo Hung films, they were being filmed without sound. Sound wasn't important, it was being added later on. So you had voices, you had voice actors, guys that did voices for guys like Jackie, up until, I think, Police Story 3 with Jackie Chan, where that was one of the first movies where they started filming with audio. So it was the first time that people got to hear Jackie Chan's voice. Right? So there was a guy that was always doing Jackie Chan's voice in all these other movies. Anyways, off the subject there. So you got to take that into account. These were Hong Kong directors in 1985 filming movies with sound. Okay, so No Retreat, No Surrender 1. It had 2 soundtracks. There were 2 versions of the movie, therefore there were 2 soundtracks. Now this version that we're watching here, this is the version that I grew up with. This was the version that we got in Australia, and to my understanding was also the version that they got in the States. Now of course this movie stars Kurt McKinney as our lead star, and a little known then, Jean-Claude Van Damme, right, who plays the main bad guy, Ivan Krasinski. Now the movie also starred a host of other martial arts talent. Off the top of my head, we've got Peter Cunningham, who would also go on to work with Corey Yun again in another one of my all-time favourite martial arts films, Righting Wrongs. Now the guy that plays Dean Ramsey, he's played by Dale Jacoby. You've seen him in the Ring of Fire and Blood Fist films with Don the Dragon Wilson. He was also in Kickboxer 2. Now Kim Tai-chong, who couldn't speak English when he was in this film. You'll remember him most notably from The Game of Death Part 2. Now let's get to the real interesting thing about this film. Like I said, 2 versions of the film, 2 soundtracks to the movie. I think a lot of people didn't realise this until the internet, right? Until people started talking about the film online. And when the DVD eventually did come out, where are we? When it did finally come out, now people started shipping these overseas, like for instance to the UK. So they wanted to relive their childhood and watch No Retreat, No Surrender, and to their surprise, this is the version of the movie that they got. And this wasn't the version that they knew. So then the debating begins on the internet, as it usually does, especially back in the day, and it was mostly on the Internet Movie Database when that was actually a reasonable website, and you could discuss films on there. So again, you got the guys from Europe and everything talking about how their version was the original version and that this was some sort of a remake or something like that. Then you had the guys from the States or the guys from Australia who grew up with this version of the film that we're watching now. And it's like, nah, this is the original version. So which one was? Well, look, they both got released the same time. I guess this is something that happens in distribution, and sometimes it's because a film isn't completely finished or ready for distribution, so somebody else handles the soundtrack. This was done in a few instances in some films where people were just like, alright, well look, this company will just finish it off so we can distribute this film. Jean-Claude Van Damme, he's a big star, we're going to get this movie out now. So to my understanding, that's one of the possibilities of what happened here. I love that bit. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about the European soundtrack first. Now the European soundtrack, well that was composed by Paul Gilreath. Actually, Dr. Gilreath these days, because he's a dentist. So Paul Gilreath, he composed a lot of broadcast advertising music. He had a book as well. His book was called something about MIDI orchestration. I think the Guide to MIDI Orchestration, I guess. We'll check that. So look, his score, it was a blend of sort of like, you know, you had pop elements and you had a flute. There was a flute element to it as well to kind of make it, I guess, to sound more Asian.
Are you okay?
I think my leg is broken.
We'll get them. We'll make them pay.
No, Jason. It's over. Fighting them is not the answer.
What is the answer?
Okay, so when I did finally watch the European version of the film, I felt that it had a different sort of vibe, different sort of a feel. It felt like a different movie. Still good, I enjoyed it, still enjoyed this film, but it wasn't the same for me. It gave it a different vibe. The vibe for me, the No Retreat, No Surrender vibe, was the US soundtrack.
If you think that is impossible, you won't hit it.
Now, I think the other thing that changed the movie for me with the European version, the European soundtrack, was the training montage song, the main song to the film. Both good songs for the type of film that it is. I think I remember playing it for a person of a younger generation to myself. He played both versions of the song, and his comment was he wanted to kill himself. So these songs aren't for everybody, right? But these are songs of the time. You know, this is a movie from 1985. These were the types of songs that you had in these films, like, you know, your Rocky IV sort of soundtrack, sort of feel. Okay. You know, it's not to everybody's taste, okay? So that's cool. But you know what you're in for when you're watching these films. And so I like both versions. Stand on Your Own from this European version.
Stand on your own, for you must do what your heart tells you. Stand on your own, and when your dreams and your frustrations work themselves through.
Joe Torono, I think, was his name. So that was the guy that was doing the vocals, but the music was by, again, Paul Gilreath, credited as composed by Paul and sung by Joe. Now, Joe Torono, I don't know who that is. And I did try to do some research online. I can't find anything about this guy. So he might have been a singer that had, like, changed his name for different recordings. You know, there's a lot of singers that were out there, they'd hire their voice and they'd put a different name to the work, for whatever reason that is. So I don't know who Joe Torono is. You know, not a bad singer, good song, Stand on Your Own, it hypes me up, it's good. Okay, so now let's go to the other edge of the spectrum. We'll go to the film that we're watching right now, and that would be the US, or look, I'll call it the Australian version, the version that we got in Australia. I assume that this is the same version that they got in the States.
Later, bro.
The composer to this version that we're watching right now, the Aussie version, the American version, is Frank Harris. Now, Frank Harris, he's a composer, he's an engineer, he's a music producer, an all-round sort of musician. Now, of course, he's done film scores, he's done a lot of scoring for commercials and documentaries over the years. Not so much martial arts films like No Retreat, No Surrender here. But he did a great job, he did a fantastic job, because I love this score to the film. Now, moving on to the main theme song to the US version, or the Australian version, Hold On To That Vision.
Is the one
song is by Frank Harris, to my knowledge, and vocals by Kevin Chalfant. Kevin Chalfant, we've spoken about him on previous videos. He was in 707. When he was with 707, his voice was quite a higher sort of a range. Their big song was called Megaforce, which was for a movie that was called Megaforce, and I can't remember if that movie was cancelled and they just had the song, or there was something about that. The biggest piece of information that I know about Kevin Chalfant is that he did some vocals with Journey, or he did some fill-in vocals with Journey. You know, Journey being the big rock band that they were, they kind of went on a hiatus back in 1986. So Steve Perry didn't want to be in the spotlight anymore, he kind of disappeared. That was the end of the band, pretty much, for that period of time. Kevin Chalfant did perform with Journey, I think by 1993. And once they started getting the ball rolling, right? So he was getting into the groove of things with Journey. And then I think by that time, or soon after that, Steve came back, and then Chalfant was out, Steve was back. Now the other big element to this song was the guitar. The guitar was actually by Joe Satriani. Composer, songwriter, virtuoso in some people's eyes. He's like a 15-time Grammy Award nominee. He's sold over like 10 million albums. He's one of the greatest all-time instrumental rock guitarists. Joe Satriani, yeah, the first time I heard that, so that was like a pretty star-studded sort of ensemble that they got there for this soundtrack, for this. And I do like this version, I do like this song better than Stand On Your Own. But, you know, we all have our own sort of tastes, okay? Now, Frank Harris. The score is very influenced by the 1980s. You get some Michael Jackson elements in there, you're getting some Rocky elements, obviously. Look, Paul Gilreath's version also had some Rocky elements going there too. How could you not? It was very hard. It was a very successful film at that time. This has puzzled me for many years. I think the mid-2000s is when Frank Harris finally released his work for No Retreat, No Surrender as a soundtrack. You couldn't buy it at the time, you couldn't buy it on CD or anything. You had to go to there was a streaming website, which is probably long gone by now, and you went on there and you bought it. And you bought it and you could stream it, and you could obviously burn it to CD. He released it along with notes. So there were notes to how he restored everything. So he's got evidence, he does have evidence that it is clearly his work. If I recall in the liner notes, he's talking about how he had to salvage a few bits and pieces. Some of them were damaged, some of them he restored, and he managed to put back together and put them on the soundtrack. Really nice soundtrack too. Before this, you couldn't get the soundtrack to this movie unless it was the European version. That was kind of funny. Back in the day, people would go and buy the No Retreat, No Surrender soundtrack. If you were in Australia, you'd buy it, and there was nothing on there that even resembled what you saw in the movie here. So there were a lot of confused people at the time. So yeah, like I said, it wasn't until the early 2000s when this version came out for us in Australia, and we're like, hey, finally, you know, we've got a soundtrack. Now, a lot of us who are No Retreat, No Surrender fans are probably also into Hong Kong cinema. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. I had seen No Retreat, No Surrender long before I got into Hong Kong cinema, because it was kind of hard to get hold of back in the day, to get hold of these films like In the Line of Duty, Tiger Cage, Yes Madam, things like that. You saw them, but we had bad versions, bad quality versions. Now, it wasn't until DVD came along that we could finally get some good quality versions of these films. And there were a lot of them that I hadn't seen yet as well. I recall sitting down for the first time watching Yes Madam. Yes Madam came out in 1985, so it came out the same year as No Retreat, No Surrender. So we'll stop the movie now at this point. I'm going to play something for you, and I'll play it side by side with the scene from No Retreat, No Surrender. So this is the first time I was watching Yes Madam. Oh, look, I'll show you the scene that I'm talking about. Boom, here we go. Okay. Alright, this is the scene where Jason and his family are leaving Los Angeles. And this is the music. Okay, this is the music that plays in that scene when they're leaving town and they're going to Seattle. I'd seen this movie a million times as a kid. I'd heard this part a million times. So the first time I watched Yes Madam, here we go. And this kind of blew me away. I was like, wait a second, what? This is the same. Does this mean that Frank Harris contributed to the soundtrack to this film? When you do go to the credits of Yes Madam, also known in the UK as Police Assassins, right? Stupid name. Now, look, Yes Madam was one of Corey Yun's movies as well. Okay, so Corey Yun directed Yes Madam, and he directed No Retreat, No Surrender, and it was at 85. So both in the same year. I don't know. So that must have something to do with Corey. I don't know, with the director, Corey Yun. So if you do look up and see who did the soundtrack to Yes Madam, it's a gentleman by the name of Romeo Diaz and Tang Xiu Lam. So who is Romeo Diaz? If you do some research on Romeo Diaz, there's not much information on whoever this is, so I assume that this is a false name that somebody else was using. Possibly could it be Frank Harris? I don't know. Romeo, he worked on keyboards and here and there like odd Cantonese pop albums. Like just a few Cantonese pop albums, which is really strange. There's no other record on who this guy is or any work. Second person that gets credited for music on Yes Madam is Tang Xiu Lam. So Tang Xiu Lam is a composer, right? He's worked on over 100 films. Now to my knowledge, he's not Frank Harris. Okay, but he's done a lot of stuff on a lot of Hong Kong martial arts films. He's done stuff on big films. Big films like Police Story with Jackie Chan, one of his biggest. Guy was active from something like 1973 till I think 2015, something like that. But there's some pretty big films there. So like I said, off the top of my head, Police Story, The Master with Jet Li. So whenever I did watch The Master with Jet Li, we also had some familiar faces from No Retreat, No Surrender in there. This one wasn't directed by Corey Yun, though, but the music did sound a lot like No Retreat, No Surrender. The My Lucky Stars films with Sammo Hung and Yun Biao, In the Line of Duty, 3, 4, 5. He did a lot of these films, but alas, he was not Frank Harris. So what's the deal here? Now that also brings up another thing for me. I remember watching Wheels on Meals. Yeah, Wheels on Meals with Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, and Yun Biao. Now, there are a lot of music cues in that film that went straight to my head. I'm like, hold on a second, that's Frank Harris stuff. That's from No Retreat, No Surrender. Check this out. Alright. And then there's this scene from Wheels on Meals. Check this out. So what's the deal? Frank Harris obviously did the music, composed the music for No Retreat, No Surrender, so did that mean that his body of work became ownership of the Hong Kong company? And they just used that music whenever they wanted? But the fact that Tang Xiu Lam is credited as a composer to these films, how come these tracks are the same? So another one that I picked up on was the Lucky Stars films with Sammo Hung, right? There was a bunch of those films. And we used to get those on TV back in the day. They used to play them late at night. They'd play the Cantonese versions. But it wasn't until when I got them on DVD, finally when I got them on DVD, that I noticed these scenes had No Retreat, No Surrender music in them. So this is the finale to No Retreat, No Surrender, okay? It's the last fight scene. This is where Jason takes on Ivan, and Jason starts getting beaten by Ivan, who's cheating a little bit. doing a bit of this nasty stuff here. Bring him back up. Get up. Okay? Alright, so it's not until the flashback. Keep going. when RJ gives the whole Jace, no retreat, no surrender, and the music gets dramatic. Here we go.
No retreat! No surrender!
No surrender. Alright, listen. Now this is like the climax of the film, okay? The trapping techniques going on here. Lots of rapid punching, flashbacks. It's super dramatic. And then it goes, it goes to the final.
You weren't ready.
Move.
An expected move for hot contact.
Okay, so totally fitting. This is totally fitting of this scene. Okay, so check this out. This is from Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars. So here we've got Yoon Byul taking on the mustache dude from Yes Madam? I can't remember. He was in something. But yeah, so we've got a really great fight scene here. And then, as his head gets... Oh, hold on. Yeah, check this out. Trapping movements. Trapping strikes, right? Final death blow. Right, rapid movements, rapid fight. That close up there as well was something that we did see in Corey Yun's film Righting Wrongs with ironically with Peter Cunningham. Peter Cunningham, who was in No Retreat, No Surrender. So, look, because it's all the same guys working on these films, so of course there's going to be a lot of overlap, a lot of things that we've seen in one film we'll see in another film. But I'm so puzzled about the music, why that music suddenly kicks in. There's nothing dramatic about that fight scene in Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars. But why it kicks in suddenly there? They just thought, well, we really like that music from No Retreat, No Surrender, we'll just put it in there. I don't know. I don't know how that works. So is that a Frank Harris composition? Or is that Tung Siew Lam's work? Now I'm sure there are a whole bunch of other examples that we could probably find here, but those are the ones that came to my mind. So, without really sitting down and going through all these films again, you will always find little parts of music in these movies that you're like, oh yeah, that was in that film too. Or that was in that. Like even the Bruce Lee films, using Pink Floyd music. Very copyright infringing back in the day. But that was something that Hong Kong movies were known for. Okay, so there you have it. So a bit of history, a bit of trivia on the soundtracks to No Retreat, No Surrender. I always found that stuff interesting. I always found the scarcity of the information on this music to be quite interesting as well. So that's one of the reasons why I've made this video. So stay tuned. We're going to be talking about the music and the soundtracks to No Retreat, No Surrender 2 and No Retreat, No Surrender 3. And we'll watch them together as we talk about them. And I'll see you again.